Hi, and welcome to Be Above Leadership's podcast. The world needs our weirdness. Lively and unscripted conversations for anyone who has ever felt they were a little bit different. I'm Ursula Pottinga and one of the founding partners of Be Above.
And I'm Betz, the other founding partner. Join us as we share our own weirdness and how this has shaped how we see the world. We'll be exploring coaching, neuroscience, consciousness, and anything else that takes our fancy.
Well, hello, sweetie. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Ursula. How are you today?
Doing good. Let's talk about weirdness, shall we?
Yes, that's what we're here for.
Yep.
What is a way that you know that you're a little weird?
Oh my gosh. I mean, really, it becomes always somewhat noticeable when I'm out there in the world interacting with other humans. And I'm always thinking, no, that's not how I see it. That's not how I would do it. That's not how I would respond. And honestly, it's a bit of a challenge because I can have people sort of complain and what kicks in is my weirdness of saying, well, if you're complaining about it, surely it means that you're wanting to do something different. So why don't you? You know, that would be one example. Or, as you know, I have got grown-up children with
Yeah.
their own lives. And every now and again they come with dilemmas and, oh, mom, and this and that. And I find myself going to this place of, well, I want to give you advice, but I'm really not going to because this life belongs to you. And then I talk to other people with grown-up
Yeah.
children. They're going like, oh, well, and I told them this and I told them that. And so that's all weirdness to me.
I think so. And I
Does
think,
this make sense?
if we just want to start, marking stuff off, one of the ways that we are weird and, it informs how we see the world is that we're both have been coaches for over 20 years. And so this is kind of wired in that people have their own answers and your job is to help facilitate that. And I agree with you. Like, I am weird in terms of, like, just in terms of how I hold my son and his accomplishments and all of
Yeah,
that. Like, he's not beholden to me. He doesn't need to do anything for me to be proud of him. And I do think that's a little,
right.
that's a little weird too.
Well, let me ask you then, addressing this weirdness is
Yeah,
how do you hold his accomplishments? This is
they're
so
his.
different from the rest of the world.
They're his. His accomplishments are his. And I am blessed that I get to have this really cool person in my life. And,
Yeah,
and just the older he gets and, the more sophisticated his thinking gets, it just blows me away. But it's not mine to, he did that. I was one of his resources. I have been a resource of love and support to him, but that doesn't mean I get to claim his accomplishments or his failures.
I love where you're going in terms of, I'm a resource in terms of love and support.
Yeah.
I think that's another part of our common weirdness, you and I. I mean, we've known each other for like 23 years. And so, I mean, I don't even remember life before N, quite frankly. Um, so, I think part of our common weirdness is that we really see the world through love. I think we've come to this point where we've realized
Mm.
that's ultimately always the one thing that will make the change that needs to be made.
And I think this is part of my weirdness and our shared weirdness is that so many years ago when we were first, you and I were first connecting over 20 years ago now, we were both doing a lot of study and exploration, and the idea that I was reading about in various spiritual teachings was really this idea of love or fear. And it
Yes.
hit me hard in a good way. Like, it really hit me like this is absolutely deep, deep truth. This is not up for debate. And that is part of how I see the world, and which is a little weird, is that it is always one or the other. I do not always succeed in coming from love. I do the damn best I freaking can, and I'm still working with human as well, but I work really hard for that. And I think about, part of my weirdness is that I really look for opportunities to be very kind to people and to connect with people. And I'm aware that that's weird. And I'm thinking about a practical example. I was in a wonderful museum here in Santa Fe yesterday, happened to be a Native American museum, and these three beautiful girls came in, and they were hoop dancers. If you've ever seen Native American gatherings or performances, they can do some folks can do amazing things with what looks like hula hoops. They're hoops, who
Okay.
probably, and they spin them on their arms and they make these amazing patterns and everything. And so these three young women were in their full regalia. And it just, for me, my heart just had to connect. I had to
Yes.
connect. And so, started talking to them, and the mom was there, and, where have you been? And it just felt wrong to me not to say, you are so beautiful. You made my day.
Yes.
Seeing you made my day.
Yes.
And to me, that's what I find sort of troubling in this conversation is, in the world today, that's a little weird. And I've even had, like my ex-husband, like that would embarrass him when I would do stuff like that. And,
Yeah.
and to not do it feels like I'm not being me.
Yeah. No, this is a really, really great example. And I have one of my own, which then also shows why it's also weird because I got, immediate feedback. And my saying, life is feedback. So
Right.
I'm in
Okay.
an Uber car in Miami, driving from my hotel to a dinner with three other people from this company retreat where I was leading a workshop
Great.
in the back. We were all in the Uber going to dinner. And the Uber driver was a lovely South American woman. I mean, probably barely in her 30s. And so, we're all loading in, and I said, "Well, I'm going to take the front seat." So I sat right next to her, and as she was driving, I said, "How did you end up in Miami?" And so she was telling me her story, and I kept saying things like, "It sounds like that driving an Uber it serves a purpose, but it doesn't sound like it's your passion or gives meaning to your
Again,
life." Like,
again, we one of the ways we're weird is that the
right?
coaching thing
Like
is always there, right?
like you
Okay,
can
keep going.
you get that
Yeah,
you get the image in this
totally.
Uber driver with these three people in the back who are talking about actions and whatever.
Strategic planning and
Yeah, exactly. And who did what and who said what and all of that. And we had this lovely conversation of this woman and her saying, yeah, I'm in the United States. There is a reason, but I miss my country. And so we talked about all of that. Well, long story short, we get out of the Uber, and one of the people in from the back, she stopped me and she looked at me and she said, "Do you ever feel you're off duty?"
like a criticism. Did it have a critical edge
I
or
don't
was it
I
curious?
don't know. I think, and like energetically it wasn't, but
Oh, okay.
it was pointing to, you know, it was sort of like that's not a conversation you're having with an Uber driver regularly.
Yeah, really. Right.
Really. And for me it was like, yeah, you do.
Well, this is because the whole idea of Uber driver or, service person or,
Yeah,
random person
yeah,
in the museum is they're in a category, and there's categories we're supposed to interact with and there's categories we're not, or we're only supposed to interact in a certain way. And for me, the category is human.
yeah.
That's the category.
The category is this is an interesting human. And I think at
Yeah.
one point, I either shared with you or one of my family members, it's saying the greatest lessons I have learned about life is from Uber drivers.
You could write the book, What I Have Learned from Uber Drivers.
Well,
But
because I mean, I have, I mean, think about London, going from the airport to a training and have this wonderful Pakistani man telling me all about his family and his boys.
well, and we know from doing this a long time and doing a lot of lead teaching, training, coaching, etc., that we know that this is one of humans' deep, deep longings and
Yes.
one they don't generally most humans don't get enough of. And I think any doorway opportunity to you make me think of I have a regular doctor appointment procedure right now 1 week a month that I have to go to. And so, I just get talking with the nurses and who knows what'll come up. Sometimes it's pets, sometimes it's kids, sometimes, it's boyfriends, whatever, girlfriends, whatever. But I'm there and I have the privilege to be there with another human and I am absolutely curious about what lights them up. And it's not and I've had the same thing said to me um both nicely and critically. Like, did you ever turn it off? Have you ever off? It's
Yeah.
like that's sort of like saying, like, do you ever just walk in the world like asleep, Anne, like the rest of us?
Well,
And
there isn't a
no,
switch. I mean, maybe that's part of the weirdness. There isn't a switch
there's
in.
not an off switch. I'm curious about humans. Now, do I go into full on coaching? No, not without permission and a, thing, but can I be curious about another human and can I give them that beautiful gift of being seen and heard, whether it's about their dog or about their life or whatever it is, I can give that gift.
And sometimes, and you and I have had conversations around that, and sometimes we discover their weirdness
Yeah,
because they can
even
feel
better.
it. And then, I mean, I
Yeah.
remember you had a stretch guy, remember, who had all these kind of like weird background and weird ideas. And sometimes I find that when I have these conversations, people open up about their own weirdness.
Yeah. 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 And because it's, the whole, I don't know, who were we talking about this the other day? This whole idea of, when I think about what I have worked on, and I think it's maybe gotten to a pretty good point. I'll just say it that way. I'm not going to say I've, mastered it or anything. But one of the things I was aware of when I first started my coaching journey, specifically, which was really, there was a lot of spiritual growth in that time. Coaching and the people I was
Hmm.
around and the books they were interested
Yes.
in, that really helped kind of jumpstart a flagging spiritual journey. That was a little, the car needed a little boost. So one of the where was I going with that? I was like, oh shit, I lost my train of thought. Um, oh, but
uh, Discovering weirdness in other people is where
discovering
we
the
are.
weirdness in other people. Oh, the what I was really aware of in the early days of coaching and in some leadership work I did was my own tendency to compartmentalize.
Mm.
So I'll give you the best classic example where there were people where I felt like I could be fully myself, let my freak flag fly, be as weird as I wanted. And mostly that was you, maybe a few others, our friend Marcy, people like that, people in that group. And then I would, really like go, God, like what is authentic to me? And then there were people like my mother, where I felt like I was constraining
Mm.
or compartmentalizing or being somewhat of a different role. And I see this a lot in business and it breaks my heart. I
Yeah,
see
yeah,
like wonderful, funny,
yeah.
funky people get all buttoned up, button themselves up because now they have to be professional. And this drives me crazy, this idea that being you is not professional. So you gotta like, you know, be the, be professional. I was, I need to be weird. I'm weird.
Well, it's what you're pointing to is when that happens is there is an underlying feeling that the way we are isn't good enough.
It's
We
not
need to
right.
be
Or it doesn't,
something else. We need to fit into this mold that the world has told us we should be. And I think that's a not a very helpful that's not a helpful undertaking because
not
it will take away your life force. I mean, it takes energy
exactly.
to suppress that. It takes energy to not be who you are. I mean,
Yes,
it's quite honestly, it's stressful. I find it stressful when
I do
I
too.
can't be myself.
When I can't just, you know, use a salty word if I want to, and things like that. And when I can manage around that, but this idea, like I have different, I wear different I wear different masks. And this is where I was saying I've really been working over many, many years to just, this is authentic. You'll get this in a business meeting. You'll get this in a personal conversation. You'll get this if I'm on the floor playing with my cats, because I don't want to make that distinction between who I really am and what other people might find acceptable, because that's not, there's too big a cost, as you
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. No, the other thing that I have found is that, and as you said, I mean, we've done this weirdness to some degree or another, and maybe it's gotten bigger probably the last 24 years. But the people that I regularly interact with now, I don't think they see me as weird anymore. They just see, oh, this is just Ursula. This is just mom. This is just,
Yeah.
whoever. And I think that I find really comforting. I remember the first couple of years, there was this battle going on between, well, this is a little bit weird about me, but should
Yeah.
I be, should I not be? But it's just been such a long time that I just can't, there isn't any difference anymore. And there's a comfort in that. There's a comfort zone there.
It releases, for me, it released energy. And
Hmm.
you make me think I think this is sort of a funny story. So I used to do coaching in a leadership program for a major, major international company. And this was the leadership program that they put their high potential leaders through. And I did a lot of work with them over the years, and was great, great company, great program. But one of the things I would ask the people that I was coaching is, I would always on my intake form just say, what are your spiritual beliefs and how important is that to you? Because I feel like that's an important thing to know about someone. And
Yes.
if they would say none, then that was fine. Like
Yeah.
I didn't care. I just wanted to be able to respect if they said, I'm a practicing Muslim, that's really, really important to me, then we might even talk about how that informs how they're seeing something. Just
Yes.
information about the person.
Right.
But what would happen about 10% of the time when I asked that question was, people would say, and I quote, "Don't tell anyone,
Oh,
but I have been reading this book by Eckhart Tolle and it's blowing me away. Don't tell anyone, but my wife wanted me to read this book, and I'm really kind of curious about this," and like that. And I would say to them, would y'all just please start talking to each other? Because
yeah.
you think you're so weird, and I've talked to three other weird people at your company this week, so you're not that weird, but you're just all hiding what is actually natural human propensity. So we've been reading this book called The Awakened Brain, and it's a book about the research on spirituality. It's
Yeah.
really fabulous.
Really
Highly recommend
fascinating.
it. It is by
Yeah.
Lisa Miller, The Awakened Brain. But one of the things that she has found and talks about, the research that says we carry a propensity for spiritual belief, not religion. Religion is a
Yeah.
human construct, but
Yeah.
for spirituality, we carry that in our DNA. It is who we are as humans.
Yeah. That
And it
is
manifests
really,
in many, many ways.
And that's a really powerful, powerful message. And I think this is maybe a good sort of, if you want to call it advice tip, at the end of our weirdness conversation, is maybe saying to people, you think you are the only one, but you are not. And unless you share it, when you feel you can trust people, that it actually, you might find there's actually more connection to other weird people than you think there is. You are not alone, and your example clearly shows that, even in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
And and it reminds me, do you remember years and years and years ago we did a training for a radio station,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we were sharing our seven levels model, which we will talk a little bit more as well in this podcast in the coming episodes. And we sort of talked about this. And you remember there was one participant who raised his hand when he said, "But isn't this just about consciousness?" We
And we
talked
have
about
not used that word
effectiveness.
because we were at this public
Yeah,
radio station and they're all super
right.
professional. It was really
Yeah,
high stakes for us,
yeah.
and we were just trying to be
Effectiveness.
in our little suits. I'm sure I had a little suit jacket on. This is probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. And, there we are. And then we're just like, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Totally. Let's have
Somebody
that
out,
conversation.
somebody outed us.
Somebody outed us exactly
It
as the
was like, oh, it's like, you might be hiding behind your suit jacket in your language of effectiveness, but it's obviously quite clear for people to see that it's a lot more than that. And I will never forget that, because I thought it was so, so funny, but also so powerful. Somebody just picking up on the energy
yeah,
of it. I mean, we
yeah.
didn't use any of the words, but there was an energy around it where this person went like, hold on a minute, you're talking about consciousness, you people. You're just calling it effectiveness.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So you're not alone. Don't hide it. You are you're amongst a good crowd of equally weird people.
well, I was just talking to someone who had one of our students who had actually wanted to set up a call for some advice about a client she was working with. And this happened to be somebody that was dealing with some trauma. We have a trauma program. And one of the things that I recommended to her, she was asking for advice, was that she help this woman find a support group.
Mm,
Because, and here's why, because we can be weird in positive, and sort of we can feel like we're weird because we, see energy or see auras or,
yeah,
talk to beings that are beyond this physical plane or, see everything through the lens of consciousness. We can be weird that way. We can also be weird because we think we're the only ones who've ever gone through something or
yes,
who
very
were
good point. Yep.
we're suffering more than anyone else.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that, and she was this student was doing an excellent job coaching the woman, but I said she needs something that coaching, one-on-one coaching, can't show her, which is that she's not that weird, that this is actually, she is involved in something which is a very predictable pattern.
Yes.
And if she could be with other people, then that's what I love about when people share vulnerably in a big group or even in a small group, but because you get that, oh my, really? Me too.
Yes.
And then you sort
Yes.
of go, oh, this isn't a personal thing.
Yeah.
I'm caught in a certain kind of energy. And given that I'm not the only one, other people have found ways out. So I can lean into that. And that's
Yeah.
the other reason not to hold in weirdness that feels like, oh, if they really knew that about me, they would just, hate me or think that I'm not as good
Yeah.
at, rather
Yeah.
than that, no, it opens a door to compassion for each other.
Yeah, that's really, really love that. Really love that message. And it also shows that we're all connected on some level. You know, that whatever this other person is going through, you might be the one voice that is needed in this scenario, you know, from this different
Right.
perspective of whatever it might be.
And that's where we get when people can share themselves really authentically,
Yeah.
whether it's through social media or in a group or anything like that, and it is authentic. What you get is, you know, doorways for other people. And you know where I learned this? So I'll tell a little story about this aspect of weirdness because we've been talking about the other, but let's talk about this aspect of weirdness. So when I was 17, so I have had something called alopecia my whole life from the time I was 3 years old. But when I was, and I would get little bald spots in my hair. But when I was 17, it just kind of all fell out. It stopped growing back. They would always grow back and then go, and it was just kind of this thing. But when I was 17, I really lost all my hair. And it was talk about feeling weird. I
Yeah.
felt like the weirdest
Yep.
person on the world.
Yep.
I didn't know anybody else this had ever happened to.
Yeah.
Um, I really thought if people knew that I didn't have my own hair, they would see me as less than,
Yes.
etc. And then when I was 18, so luckily I only really sat in that stew for about a year, but it was so painful, so hard. And then I did a group thing where lots of people, it was like a group training kind of thing, but there was lots of very vulnerable sharing from
Yeah.
people. I'm in this group and I'm 18 years old and I'm listening to everybody share about whatever the crap they had going on in their life.
Yeah.
And in my 18-year-old brain, I went, oh my God, everybody feels this way. They just
Yes.
have different reasons. For me, it
Yes.
was losing my hair. For somebody else's, because they were raised by an alcoholic. For somebody
Yeah.
else's, because they never finished their high school. For it was all different reasons why they felt if people knew that about me, they would
Mhm.
not embrace me as part of the human experience. Like
Yeah.
I really felt like I was somehow outside the
Yeah.
human race is the
Yes.
only way I can describe it. And in the sharing and the generosity of those people
Yeah.
sharing their experience, I rejoined the human race
Yeah.
and said, oh, everybody feels this way for different reasons.
Yeah.
It still took me it took a long time, but that was the doorway through me
Hmm.
integrating the fact that lots of people have hair and I don't. I still don't, by the way, if you're looking at me. I've worn wigs since I was 17 years old. So that's just the truth about me.
Hmm.
And to be able to say that today and have no physiological shame or anything is extraordinary. And it took many years to get to the point that I could just matter of factly talk about it.
Yeah.
But that was the door that opened it. Was
Yeah. Well, and in the sharing and in feeling you're back in the human race, there's so much healing that can occur because when we keep these challenges to ourselves, then they will just get locked in here. And when we can share them with other people, and we know that other people have issues and challenges that they're also wrestling with, I find that so healing. You
well,
feel seen and understood, and feel that there's compassion in the world for the struggles and challenges that we have. But if we don't share them, nobody will ever know.
yeah, and I think the other thing that happens when we don't share them, and because this makes sense to me, is we're for depending on what it is and depending on who you are, not everyone, obviously, but I was shielded. I was
Hmm.
energetically shielded until I
Yeah.
could talk about it, until I could incorporate it for myself, until I could love that part of myself and just
Yeah.
accept it as a fact.
Yeah.
I was shielded, and I'm sure I pushed people away because
Hmm.
I didn't want them to come to, it'd be like this big deal. If I, it was a really big deal if I told somebody, "I'd sit you down," kind of thing. And
Yeah.
because I was holding it as such a big deal and
Yeah.
damage
Yeah.
and something I did not love about myself,
Yeah.
that's also then what I projected. And what I started realizing as I, worked with this for 40 years, what what I started realizing is the more at peace I was, the less anybody else cared about it,
Scared. Oh,
boyfriends or
absolutely.
whoever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It was
totally.
me bringing that.
Yeah.
So, so
Well,
why does the world need more weirdness, Ursula? Why does the world need people? If you're listening today, why does the world need our listeners' weirdness?
it opens up the world. And I find that although we are calling it weirdness, I don't believe it actually is. It's the world that is weird, not seeing that we need to look at life through this lens of, sharing and vulnerability and authenticity and you
Kindness and
know, and
connection.
kindness and connection and talking to each other, including people. The world needs that so much right now. And so, as I said, for me, this isn't the weird part of the world. The rest, the
But
rest,
yeah, we might be minority, but it's really,
yeah.
here's what this makes me think of, Ursula. So years and years ago, this was my very first job ever teaching coaching. And this is, I don't know, 20 years ago now, or 15 years ago, something like that. And I had my very first group that I was working with, and it was a virtual group. And I was in the very first class. We did introductions, and I'm your leader for the next 6 months. And, what do you want to know about me? You can ask me anything. I thought they were going to ask me, like, where did you grow up, or how many children do you have? Somebody said, I don't remember who it was. Somebody said, what's your vision for coaching?
Wow.
I know. I was not prepared for that. But
Can you
luckily,
remember what
I
did you say?
remember very well what I said, because the angels spoke through me. Somebody spoke through me. And what I said without thinking is a world without coaches. Because to be curious, to not try to fix people,
Mm,
to not have all the answers, but to open up a space for someone to explore themselves, to see people deeply, as we've been talking about, your Uber driver, my young women at the museum. That's how it's supposed to be with human beings.
yeah,
What we're doing instead of that, to your point, is weird. So hopefully, if there were a golden age, this profession of pay me so you have a place to explore and be seen and plan becomes obsolete at some point,
yeah,
because you have 20 people you could have that conversation with,
yeah,
right? And they have
yeah,
it with you. And so, this is just a way of connecting as human beings that right now is a profession, but it's a deeply satisfying way of connecting.
yeah. Yeah, and you might find the group that already gives you some of that, the curiosity, not being judged, but having an open space to share
Yeah.
yourself with whoever that one, two, three people are. And those people you have to hold on to and
Yes.
cherish, because
Yes.
that will help, that has helped us evolve
Yeah.
by being together and by seeing, helping each other see the world through this very different lens, where we had a mirror where you could look at and say, am I seeing this in a right way? Is there something wrong here? And that's been huge. Without that, we can't evolve on our own, that's for sure.
No, we don't. We don't. There's a big, I think this is another sort of weird thing, is at least in North America, and I think particularly in the United States, even more than Canada, there is this feeling like if you didn't do it alone and by yourself, it didn't count. And if you were on the team, who was the best one of the team, who should, not be voted off the island or whatever.
Yeah,
Like this idea of
yeah,
individual accomplishment which is so counter to who our hearts are as human beings. And I think about, what you and I create together, it comes in the space between us, you know, and it doesn't matter whose mouth it comes out of because it occurs in the space between us.
Mhm.
Ursula, if you had one piece of advice about all this conversation about weirdness, what would that be?
Well, as I said earlier on, you're not alone. If you think you're weird, don't worry about it. Be weird and share your weirdness with people where at this moment in time you feel it's okay to share. Because the truth also is that sometimes it's not okay. Some people are not safe to share your weirdness with. But if you feel you have people where it is, be that. It is okay. It's what the world needs. How about you?
Well, kind of building on that, I think that's a really good call out is that there are places where, and I have seen this happen where I have shared authentically and vulnerably, and it has actually cost me work because they weren't ready, they weren't expecting that, like,
It was
and it
like, oh,
wasn't even
wow.
anything really
Yes.
triggering, but it was
Yeah.
kind of like, ooh, like
Yeah.
that. So I think it is also, yeah, know your audience, find the places where you can be, but let's
Yeah.
also push the envelope. Let's make it more
Mhm.
normal. Let's make things like real, authentic connection before we get into the business of a meeting. Let's make that normal,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Let's make, let's make being more coach-like normal in organizations and that. So be aware, know who your people are, find your people and push it. Let's start pushing because the way we're talking about weirdness, we just come back to and saying it's just we're giving ourselves permission to connect the way human beings long to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you like our weird conversations about weirdness and not weirdness, um, tune into our next episode. And thanks for hanging out. Thanks,
Thank
Anne.
you so much. Please like and subscribe.
Yes, please do.